One of the most frequent types of comments I see on my videos is how to get better at grand races. It's some sort of question that leads me to believe a lot of players just have a hard time with grand races, and it shows up in the races. If you look at the rankings at the end of races, almost half the field doesn't even finish the race. That means half the field is not within 50 seconds of the first place person. And with every month that goes by, the first place person, aka the sweats of the game, are just getting better and better, and the new players are having a harder and harder time with it. So I figured I'd put a tip video together like this that shows off the 25 most common mistakes that players make in the grand races. All right, let's go. Now, before we get into the mistakes themselves, I want you to know this is coming from me, a person who has 900 hours in the game, and I've won about 30% of my grand races. Now, that's not a huge stat. There are players who have insane win-loss ratios, but they're not making tip videos like this, so I decided to put these together. And seeing how I communicate with a lot of those best players on a daily basis, I really thought it'd be fitting and I could probably help a lot of you out there who are just struggling to finish races. All right. Let's get into it. Now keep in mind, these are not in any particular order. This is just 25 mistakes that I know players are making. Number 1, players tend to overuse NOS when slipstream is available. This is a super common one. When you have cars in front of you that are within slipstream range, there's no need to blast your entire bottle of NOS. In this clip, I recognize that slipstream is available. I limit my NOS usage to about half the bottle just to get within the range of slipstream. And then once I'm in that range, I stop using NOS, and by the end of this straight, I have a full bottle of NOS to use when we exit the next turn, which turned out to be super helpful because I completely botched that turn and I needed that extra NOS to help me maintain my pace. Don't overuse NOS when slipstream is available. Number 2, players tend to try to pass everyone at every single chance they get instead of using slipstream. Slipstream is too powerful in this game to completely ignore it, especially if you're struggling to make the podium or even struggling to finish a race. There is, however, a very unfortunate reality from the middle of the field to the back. Everyone seems to be ignoring slipstream. So if you can find a slipstream partner, great, use them to go faster. But if not, then try to help someone else slipstream behind you. What I mean is, if a group in front of you is out of your range, but you have someone behind you, don't intentionally NOS away from that person and create too much space. Because the slipstream benefit he would get from you is actually the same benefit that you would get from him being behind you, and that's called drag bump. Players that are directly behind you, close enough, are giving you the same benefit that they are getting. Both parties benefit from a slipstream scenario. Also, if he happens to pass you because he's using your slipstream, even better. You can then jump behind him and slipstream him at his faster pace. It's important to use this instead of simply fighting for every single position at every chance you get. It's okay to slow down a little and sit behind somebody or not NOS in order for the person behind you to kind of catch up a little bit. Number 3, I see players do this all the time. They fight in the turns. This slows both parties down. This is a big no-no. Many of the players have hard times with turns just by themselves. You might be one of them, so there's no need to fight them for positioning. It will end up costing both of you time and allow the players in front to slip away from you or the players in back to pass you if you guys end up crashing in the turn. It is far better to allow space, take the turns in control, and use NOS to accelerate around someone if and when they make a mistake, rather than attempting to pass inside the turns. Number 4, players don't pay attention to the route layout. I do this all the time myself, and I personally need to get better at it. But while loading into the grand race, the game shows you the route. At the very least, you can tell if the route is going to feature more straights or more turns, and that allows you to prepare accordingly. Each class has a variety of cars whose strengths are either top speed or cornering and acceleration, and that brings me to my next mistake. Players tend to pick the wrong cars or slow cars. Understanding what cars are good for each type of route is basically like gaining free pace. It's a simple step that has nothing to do with driving, but it sets you up to be as successful as possible in the race. There are all kinds of resources here on YouTube from various channels, including my own, that tell you what the best cars to use are in grand races. I will link my updated Grand Race meta video for you in the description if you want to check that out. Also, I know there's a small stigma around using meta cars, but I wouldn't worry about it at all. You're watching this video to improve at Grand Racing, and listening to people tell you to drive off meta cars is absolutely ridiculous. Races are about going fast, and to go the fastest, you need to use the fastest cars, period. Start learning what the best cars are and use them. Number 6, I see players sticking to the road instead of using shortcuts. Obviously, shortcuts are shorter. Otherwise, they'd be called long cuts or maybe just stupid paths, but the point of them is to save time, and knowing them is obviously beneficial to your performance in a grand race. If you're a person who believes in sticking to the race path, that is totally fine, but you are putting yourself at a significant disadvantage. Learning all of the cuts just comes with playtime. Pay attention to what others are doing in the races and try your best to memorize certain routes so that when you see that route again, you can recognize, oh, I need to cut that corner, or oh, I need to stay left of that tree there. Anyways, this just takes a little more intentional focus on trying to remember some of the areas within the grand race routes. You can also watch the fastest racers stream like Goliath, Simg, Rhino, and many others. So try giving that a chance when you have some free time. Number 7, I see players riding around with stock bodies on their cars. You need to add body kits. Not adding a body kit is a small thing, but it makes a noticeable difference. If you want to check out my test data on this, I'll have a link to that video in the description, but also you can easily test this for yourself by driving a car like the Camaro RS in Street 1 without a body kit and then driving it with a body kit. The difference between those two are tremendous, but the difference in pace is going to depend on the car. Sometimes it's super noticeable and sometimes it's more slight. Either way, I see it as a mistake to not equip one because it's like adding better handling to the car. Number 8, I see players not resetting their car quick enough. It's important to recognize when you are not going to be able to save yourself and just reset your car. In this clip, we got netcoded pretty badly and I was forced into the wilderness. As soon as I realized what was going on, I decided to reset. Next time, I need to focus on recognizing what is happening a little bit earlier so that I can get back on the road faster, and you should too. Number 9, I see players not using gutters. Quick explanation for people who don't know what a gutter is. The gutter is the transition between the road and the dirt. To use a gutter, you drop your wheels on the inside of the turn into the dirt and you keep the outside wheels on the pavement. This allows you to take the corner at a much faster speed than keeping all 4 wheels on the pavement. Here, let me show you. In this comparison, I decided to drive the gutters poorly just to show you how crazy the difference in pace is. So on the left, I'm using gutters poorly, and on the right, I'm sticking to the pavement. Notice the difference in speed after only 1 gutter. Even though I exited the gutter slightly early on the left, I pulled ahead of myself who was not using the gutter. Now imagine that 5 times going up an entire hill. The pace really stacks up. This is not an easy technique and it's pretty hard to teach, but I'll give you a couple of tips. Number 1, if you're still using default controller settings, it will be much harder to use the gutters. Try a slightly higher sensitivity and a greater max lock with 0 dead zone. Next, some cars are great at it and others are terrible. Get the feel for it in a car like the F40, which is actually really good at it, then practice it with other cars. And third, the speed you enter the gutter with is really important. I would describe it as slightly too fast for the corner. You can't just go full out into the gutter and expect it to save you. You will just drive right through it and into the wall. Number 10, I see a lot of players full throttling out of the turns. It is much better to ease your throttle coming out of the turn, but it's purely situational because it really depends largely on the capability of the car you're driving. However, it is really good practice to go half throttle coming out of a turn until you see the car straighten up a bit, then you can go full throttle. Cars like the Agera R in Hyper are very easy to give too much throttle to when you're coming out of a turn. You can practice with that car on Legendary versus Rivalry if you feel like you're spinning out too much during the races. Number 11, I see players not adjusting pro settings at all. Now, the myth about pro settings is that they affect the car's performance in a large way. They do not. What they affect is your ability to take full advantage of a car's potential based on how it feels. Pro settings are all about feeling. Your goal is to make that car as predictable and compatible with your driving style as possible. If you're not at the very least using someone else's pro settings to see what you like and don't like, I think you're making a mistake, especially if you are having trouble with a specific car. Make adjustments and test it out on your favorite course. Then go back, make some more adjustments, test it again. If you don't know exactly what each setting does, you can actually refer to this info here and try your best to make tunes that feel good to you. Number 12, I see a lot of players not drifting the hairpin off-road corners. This is a pretty common mistake. In most cases, it's faster to drift the off-road hairpins than it is to slow down and maintain traction. I know it feels slow, but it's actually faster. All of the top racers use the drift strategy in off-road hairpins, and you should too. Particularly with rally cars, you see a lot of people drift directly into the wall, bounce off it, and keep going. Now, you obviously can't take corners at full speed, so slowing down a little before the turn is recommended, and if you can throw your car into a rut like you see in these clips, it will be even better. Number 13, I see a lot of players using NOS incorrectly. The biggest offense is using the NOS as soon as you get it and keeping an empty tank. This is so bad for your overall speed. The NOS is more powerful the more full the tank is, so you need to try to keep that tank as full as possible. Your goal should be to never let it get below half, even though this is a little bit circumstantial. Sometimes it makes sense to blast your NOS, especially if it means staying in slip with a pack that is pulling away. The majority of the time though, it's important to use your NOS in shorter bursts. Let's take a look at the difference between poor NOS usage and proper. On the left, you're going to see poor NOS usage, and on the right, you're going to see the proper NOS usage. At first, it may look like using the whole tank is working out. However, it quickly reverses. Pause it. It's very apparent here at 50 seconds into the race, both drivers are in generally the same place, but the driver on the left has no NOS going into the upcoming gutter turn, and the driver on the right has a full tank. And you can probably guess what happens after that turn. Play it. The proper NOS side gets to the 41% checkpoint at 114.6, going 255 miles per hour with a half a tank of NOS, whereas the tank emptier guy gets there at 115.9, going 230 miles per hour and no NOS. I think I've made my point here. Use your NOS in short bursts, try to keep your NOS as full as possible. Number 14, I see a lot of players forget to empty their NOS just before the vehicle change. I'm certainly a frequent offender of this mistake. I do it all the time. If you haven't noticed, when you switch vehicles, you receive a full tank of NOS with your new vehicle. So it really doesn't make sense to not use the NOS in your tank before hitting that car switch. Keep in mind the transitions always happen at 33% and 66%, which is basically 1/3 and 2/3 of the race. If you're approaching that percentage, you know you're getting close to that transition and you need to use your NOS. At number 15, I see a lot of players that are not steering or controlling their car during the transitions. Now you may have noticed that you can actually steer your car before it's spawned in, but did you also see that you can actually brake, accelerate, downshift, and upshift your car as well? This example shows a transition from Hyper to Street 2, which is a slower car class, and I'm heading directly into a turn. Before the car spawns in, I'm already steering across the grass and braking to control the car. And in this example, I don't run into the wall. Now the same thing with this next one where I transition from Street 2 to AGP. I'm controlling the speed of the car before it spawns in by downshifting to prepare for that upcoming corner. At 16, I see a lot of players let early collisions affect the rest of their race. Early collisions that send you off the road can be some of the most frustrating moments in the race. It's easy to look up at the place that you're in and think your race is over, but the reality is, to prevent yourself from being DNF'd by the leader, you just have to be within 50 seconds of him at the end of the race. In this race, Goliath and I were partied up and we both had some issues early. He was able to get out in front and I continued to have problem after problem after problem. When this happens, you have to take a breath and focus up. The goal for the rest of the race should be survival and pace. Obviously, when this happens, you're not gonna win, so the goal should be to finish as fast as you can, which means not compounding the bad luck that you've just had with more driving mistakes. This sort of goes back to like racing at your own pace. Crashing is part of the grand races and it's basically unavoidable, but the fastest racers are able to put that aside and focus to salvage their races. This is more of a mindset thing than a physical tactic, but it's super important. Number 17, I see a lot of players not avoiding the breakables when possible. This is super common. It's important to avoid all of the breakable objects when it's possible because they completely destroy your pace, and the best players have a keen attention to detail when it comes to cutting these corners. Let's see if you can spot the difference between these two clips. Alright, let's take a look at them a little bit closer. In the first clip, I cut this corner a bit too sharp and I hit the stone wall, which makes my exit speed about 140 miles an hour. But in the second clip, I stay a little bit wider, I avoid it, and I'm able to exit the corner at 150 plus. I still didn't do the turn perfect though. The goal would have been to go between the wall and this pole, because the pole also slowed me down. Alright, let's keep going. The corner after next, I cut to the left and hit 2 poles, which drops my speed from 180 to 140. Whereas in the second clip, I avoid all the poles and I exit the cut at around 190 miles per hour. Breakables are a huge detriment to your speed and you need to have the attention to detail, otherwise you're at a huge disadvantage. Number 18, I see players brake or downshift way too late going into corners. It's important to enter the turns at the right speed, and every turn is a little bit different. So understanding how much to brake and when to downshift if you're in a manual is super key. It's a difficult thing to teach because it's really all about feeling the car and what it's capable of, but you need to learn that, and that brings me to my next mistake. Number 19, I see players using way too many different cars in search of a fix to losing. I strongly recommend using the same cars over and over until you start placing in the top 5 consistently. The more familiar you are with your car, the better. You will start to develop a keen sense of what that car is actually capable of, and you can start to push that car to its limits. You will also start to become familiar with the turns in the routes and how they affect your car. Time behind the wheel in the same car is the fastest way to get better. At number 20, players like to position themselves on the outside of corners in large groups. I think most of you know this one, but it is an obvious mistake, so I had to include it in this video. If you position yourself on the outside of a turn while in a large pack, you are opening the door for people to push you into the wall. It will happen 100% of the time. Even if you position yourself on the inside of the turn, it can still happen, but not as often. Make sure you get to the inside of the turn, especially in the first couple of turns where everyone is bunched up. Number 21, I see a lot of players spending time blocking someone from passing them and defending that 12th place. Blocking in general is just so bad for your race overall, and honestly, it's kind of cheesy and definitely frowned upon by a lot of players, including me. It's a move that says you're weak and your pace isn't good enough to keep people behind you. Besides that though, when you start paying attention to cars behind you, you can easily make mistakes, and on top of that, players who have a faster pace are gonna get around you anyways. Why not make it smoother and give them some room, and then here's an idea, use the slipstream to match their pace. That not only will improve your overall time, but it'll also help them go faster as well. At number 22, see a lot of players focus on speed rather than control. Control will equal more speed. Now don't get me wrong, it is a race, so speed is important. But if you're all over the road, controlling your car is more important. This sort of falls under a mindset as well, but basically you need to drive within your skill limit. The more times you do that, the faster you're gonna get. Once again, it's all about time behind the wheel. At number 23, a lot of players don't like to race their own race. The key to racing fast is not constantly comparing yourself to the other 27 racers, but executing your driving. Stay on the road, stay off the walls, try your best to avoid collisions, and you will 100% be going faster than trying to match someone else's pace. That is asking for disaster. Race your own race and try to drive as clean as possible, and you will see improvements in your finishing positions. Number 24, I see a lot of players having zero awareness of the cars around them. Being aware of the cars behind you, particularly just before a turn, is key to survival in those turns where the group is all bunched up. Your goal is to start wide, then turn into the apex of the corner, and then accelerate out. But a lot of times, as you start to go wide, someone will dive down in the inside and you run into them while turning into the apex, which not only messes you up and likely sends you into a wall, but it also helps them make the corner because they just used you as a wall. The best thing to do is to look back real quick while you're heading for a turn just to see if anyone is within the diving range. If they are, you can either brake hard and early to allow them to send it directly into that wall, or block the inside by jumping into the gutter early. This will usually cause them to adjust by going wider, and they usually just run into the wall, or they run into the back of you, which is the best case scenario if there is going to be a collision. Either way, you wouldn't have known to perform those maneuvers had you not just taken a quick peek behind you. Don't spend every second looking back, but quick peeks are important. And finally, number 25, I see a lot of players spin out on dirt, and I get a lot of questions about this, particularly for racing and AGP. The cause of this is a combination of two things. The first is that you let off the throttle. You have to go full throttle through the dirt. Half throttle will also do, but full throttle is better. This will maintain grip, which doesn't make any sense, but it's the truth. The other thing is you can't make sharp turns. The car will spin even if you have the throttle pinned. So keep the hammer down and make slight turns as opposed to harsh angles. Oh, and also nosing off-road is a big gamble. Sometimes it will completely throw your car to one side or the other. And finally, if you need to control your speed, I see a lot of players let off the throttle instead of braking. You can keep the throttle pinned and also pull the brake. That will actually allow you to control your speed. Another thing is downshifting in the dirt. It's not super recommended, but you can do it. All right, I know this was a long one and I appreciate you guys making it through the video. If you have any questions about this, my intention is to help people get faster. So you can send me a DM on Instagram, Twitter, or Discord. I read every single message and I reply. So feel free to ask questions if you're struggling with something specific. And if I don't know the answer, I'll do my best to find one for you. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I will catch you on the next one. Trigger out.